Around 1200 BC, the ancient world didn't fall in a single moment, it began to break apart. Cities burned, not in conquest, but in collapse, ports fell silent. Trade routes that once connected entire civilizations simply stopped. Something powerful enough to disrupt everything moved through the Mediterranean world. Ancient records give it a name, but almost no explanation. This is where the story becomes incomplete. And then, the records fall silent. Archives end mid-sentence, inscriptions are left unfinished. The written story simply stops. Not because nothing happened, but because events moved faster than history could record. What follows is absence. And absence is rarely accidental. In the midst of the collapse, a name appears, not as an explanation, but as a placeholder. Ancient records mention them briefly, often in passing, without describing who they were or where they came from. They are simply called the Sea Peoples. No clear homeland, no shared identity, no consistent description across sources. The name does not explain the events, it only marks confusion. A label used when understanding fails, a name without a face. What makes this collapse so difficult to explain is where it happens, not in one city, not in one kingdom, but across the Mediterranean. Almost at the same time, coastal settlements fall, inland towers weaken, trade networks unravel simultaneously. This wasn't a local disaster, it was a regional shock. This collapse wasn't felt in palaces alone. It was lived by people. Families abandoned their homes. Communities moved with what they could carry. Animals were taken or left behind. What broke was not just power or trade, but daily life itself. Civilization doesn't end on stone walls, it ends when living patterns fall apart. The Sea Peoples are often described as invaders, a sudden force that struck without warning. But the evidence tells a more complicated story. They arrived not only with weapons, but with families, possessions, and animals. This was movement on a massive scale. People leaving something behind, not advancing toward conquest, but searching for survival. If these groups were invaders, before the movement began, the environment itself was changing. Evidence points to prolonged droughts, failing harvests, and increasing pressure on already fragile systems. Fields produced less. Water sources became unreliable. Animals weakened. And communities were forced to adapt or leave. This was not a sudden disaster, but a slow tightening of limits. When people finally moved, it may not have been in search of conquest, but in response to a world that could no longer sustain them. By the time the Sea Peoples appear in the records, the collapse was already underway. Trade networks were weakening. Cities were struggling to sustain themselves. Political systems were stretched thin, and alliances were beginning to fracture. This was not a stable world suddenly attacked, but a fragile one under increasing pressure. The Sea Peoples did not arrive at the beginning of the collapse. They arrived in the middle of it, moving through a world that was already coming apart. What if the Sea Peoples were not the cause of collapse, but a symptom of it? Across the Mediterranean, different societies were already under strain. Resources were scarce, systems were failing. Movement became inevitable. In that context, migration and conflict blur together. Not driven by a single plan, but by shared pressure. History often looks for someone to blame, but sometimes the real story is about a world coming apart.